So what is going on, guys? I am BlackOpsAmazing. Welcome back to another video on the channel where today we are looking at the story of AVOGADRO, who we also know as Cornelius Purnell. I have done a video on this guy probably about 2 years ago, but since then we've had a load of new information, we've had new maps, so this is the updated story. As always, if you enjoyed today's video, drop a like button if you want to, make sure you are subscribed, but let's get into it. Here we go, enjoy. During World War II, Cornelius Purnell was a member of the OSS and a handler of several operatives. He successfully led the operation to infiltrate Peter McCain into Group 935, where he was transferred to the asylum facility in Berlin. Suspecting that Group 935 was losing control over their experiments, Cornelius sent in a Marine recon team consisting of Tank Dempsey, Smokey, John Banana and Paxton Gunner Ridge to rescue Peter from the asylum in August of 1945. However, when they arrived at the asylum facility, Peter, who was ousted as a spy, had already managed to escape, leaving the recon team forced to fight off against hordes of the undead, where Smokey and John were killed, Paxton managed to escape and Dempsey was ultimately captured by Group 935. A month later after his escape, Purnell attempted to contact Peter McCain, telling him to rendezvous at the Rising Sun facility, which was under the control of Group 935 and Division 9, where Peter eventually arrived, parachuting from a plane down into the facility, where his parachute got tangled up in the roof, killing him. After the war was over, Purnell was promoted to Stations Chief of the CIA at Groom Lake in Nevada, where large deposits of element 115 were discovered. Many years later in 1961, the CIA began construction at Groom Lake for a teleporter to establish a link between the facility and Griffin Station on the moon, with Purnell overseeing the project. Purnell will then begin to oversee the construction of the American Pyramid device, otherwise known as the APD, which they had planned to use as an interrogation method at the nuclear testing site in Groom Lake. A month later, in February of 1963, Purnell learned about the existence of Samantha Maxis from Dr. Schuster. After months of research, he was convinced the US government would need more Element 115 to fight Samantha, meaning he would also be able to secure the funding for his program he had dreamt about for many years. Project Broken Arrow. On August 3rd, 1963, while new tests were being performed with the teleporter, the Ultimus crew, being Richtofen, Takio, Nikolai and Dempsey, were teleported from the moon and arrived at Groom Lake. And after having them medically examined, Purnell kept the crew locked up in Hangar 4 as test subjects for their Element 115 experiments. But as we know, unfortunately for Purnell, Ultimus would go on to escape with the help of their Primus counterparts months later. And that's exactly what happened, with the events taking place at the Ascension base, and Samantha sending the zombies to track down Ultimus. Yuri was sent to the Pentagon to thwart their survival, causing an undead outbreak, leaving the Pentagon a bloody mess. After the incident at the Pentagon, projects from Broken Arrow that were focused on a targeted assault at Samantha were put on hold. The APD, which the Americans had planned to also use as a method to take Samantha down, was then repurposed and solely used as an interrogation tool for Project MK Alpha, and as such, more funding was provided to ensure the construction of the APD was completed on schedule. A year later, on June 1964, after stealing an elemental shard from one of Division 9's abandoned research facilities, Purnell and Dr. Hale used it to resurrect Peter McCain's dead body after retrieving him hanging from the Rising Sun facility, and after being brought back to life, Peter then began working at Broken Arrow. As another year passed, on February 1965, as part of Phase 2 of MK Alpha, Purnell began interrogating Yuri Zavosky, who we also know as the Pentagon Thief, after he was captured for causing that incident. Purnell learned from Yuri about the Ether and Agatha, but in the interrogation process, Purnell eventually ended up electrocuting Yuri to death. And it was that moment that began his obsession with reaching Agatha. After years of exposure to Element 115, he began hearing voices in his head and grew increasingly paranoid. And by 1966, Purnell began having recurrent dreams, one of them showing him becoming AVOGADRO inside of the APD using the elemental shard.
Oh, there must be a way. There's got to be a way. The voices in my head, it's been years now, they won't leave me alone. The only way to temper them is liquid courage. At night it's worse. It's lonely here. So quiet in the middle of the desert. I hear them seeping through the dry cracks of dead dirt. They want me to find the way through.
Now can we get to the good stuff?
The gateway. I found a schematic in Dr. Richtofen's journal. He'd made a plan, a backup plan, to build a device, a fast lane. We tried to build it, but we didn't have the necessary components. They just don't exist. The last several months, I've had this reoccurring dream. In it, I'm able to merge with the ether, the spirits. They say it's the only way. I need to investigate this further.
A year later, on August 1967, in an attempt to reach Argotha, Purnell begins experimenting on himself with the help of Dr. Hale. He places himself inside of the APD and pulls an electrical current from the elemental shard to flood the pyramid.
This is Dr. Hale conducting Purnell test number 1. The date is August 3rd, 1967. The director has secured himself inside the APD, and we are ready to begin the transfer. When I flip this switch, an electrical current will be pulled from the elemental shard and will flood the APD. Are you ready, Director?
Yes, Dr. Hale.
Cornelius, are you sure about this?
More than anything.
Commencing test. Director! Ending test. Director, what? Are you all right?
Better than all right, my dear. Run it again.
His experiments continued until 1968, where Peter, who at that time was deputy director at Camp Edward, heard about the experiments and decided to file a report to General Sawyer against Purnell. Unfortunately for Peter, Purnell learned about the report and had him arrested. Months later, in 1968, Sawyer and his men eventually arrive at Camp Edward at the same time that Purnell is doing one of his experiments, attempting to reach Argotha. That is when things go wrong. A burst of electricity from the shard shoots up Purnell's spine, transforming him into the entity known as AVOGADRO. The whole facility then loses power. AVOGADRO begins to release Nova 6 gas throughout the facility and unleashes not only zombies, but also the ADAM robots, who begin to kill people on sight until AVOGADRO is eventually contained and locked inside of the APD. They then rig a nuclear bomb above the pyramid device, so if AVOGADRO was to ever escape again, he would be killed instantly, and then the facility was put into full lockdown and abandoned. Rushmore, the facility's computer system, was shut down. Almost 60 years later, on July 2025, two Broken Arrow agents who were Russman and George Barkley returned to the facility and used the APD to transfer a sample of the AVOGADRO to the Hanford site in Washington.
All right, I'm gonna give it a kick. You ready?
You're clear.
Facility transport via pyramid device is now available.
All right, let's just grab a little juice.
Sample now transferred to Hanford site.
What? That's it?
Shoot, we're not sending the entity to Hanford, just grabbing a sample.
What does Hanford want with it?
They've been interested in the entity for some time now, wanted to pursue further scientific endeavors with it, whatever that means.
A few months later, on October 13th, Primus and Ultimus then arrive at Camp Edward to retrieve the elemental shard for their mission, but before they could do this, because it was locked inside of the APD with AVOGADRO, they activate the facility, and Rushmore, the AI system, tells them before he can grant them access to the shard, they must first complete a few objectives for him, which is exactly what they do. In the end, Rushmore then opens the APD, which results in the awakening of AVOGADRO. He escapes, the nuke above the pyramid is detonated, however, does nothing to stop him, leading to an intense battle between Primus, Ultimus, and AVOGADRO. But eventually, Primus and Ultimus force AVOGADRO back into the APD before collecting the elemental shard, and then, along with Rushmore, transfer him to the Hanford site in Washington for proper imprisonment. And that's exactly where he ended up, At the Hanford site, Avogadro was contained in one of Broken Arrow's facilities that was disguised as a power station, where eventually in 2035, when Victus came along, who were Misty, Molten, Stuhlinger and Russman, after the destruction of the Earth, ultimately they free Avogadro from his imprisonment, where after having constant fights with him in Hanford, he is eventually consumed by the pylon as a power source for Maxis. And that is his story. So there we go, that is it for today's video guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you have enjoyed, a like rating would of course be appreciated. Make sure you are subscribed to stay up to date with the latest videos on the channel. Let me know in the comment section below which character you would like to see next, and as always we'll see you in the next one. Until then, goodbye.